Well, hello, everyone. It is Tuesday, September 7th. Welcome to the Tiger Club Zoom call for this week. Our guest today will be Blair Kerkhoff, the all-everything reporter for the Kansas City Star. Before we get started, a couple of items to note. Please go on to kctigerclub.com. If you have not renewed your membership, do so. After the 15th, the live Zoom calls will be restricted to members only. So this week and next week, it's open to everybody, but after the 15th, you will have to have a membership to get on live. Of course, you can always watch our calls later in the week on YouTube. This Saturday, Tigers take on Kentucky, 6:30 on the SEC Network. There will be a watch party at Chicken Pickle, one of our great sponsors in North Kansas City. So I invite you to come join us for that. Our online auction is up on the website, and that ends at 5 o'clock tomorrow. We still have some good items left, although I do understand we sold our last lot a parking pass in the last day or two. So make sure you get on there. There's some great items, good autographed items from Coach Drinkwitz. So all that being said, Blair, welcome. You continue to be quite a busy guy covering the Tigers along with all your other duties at the Star.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and thanks for having me. Yeah, indeed. The reason we've got the nifty blue Star background here is because we recorded a Royals show here just about an hour or so ago, and that should be posted on the Star's website. We're talking Tigers here at noon, and at 2 o'clock, I'm talking Kansas State football and 2:30 Kansas football, and at some point today, I've got to come up with some Chiefs stories. So, yeah, a little bit of everything today, but some of it's slammed because of Labor Day week, but I love it. It's, I love being involved in the sports that we cover, the teams that we cover here at the Star. And look, I've been, for lack of a better word, the Missouri beat writer. I don't consider myself a beat writer in the way that Dave Matter or Gabe DeArmond or Jeff Bloom with the Columbia paper are beat writers. They're there every single day, partly because they live there. But I've been paying attention more closely to the Tigers here, end of basketball season and now the beginning of football season. And I've enjoyed that. I really have enjoyed getting to become reacquainted with the folks at Mizzou and in Columbia. And hopefully my Missouri beat writing days are going to come to an end here in the next week or so.
Okay, so we got somebody new coming on, you think?
We do. We do. We're in the process of hiring, and I'm told that within the next week to 10 days, we'll have an announcement on that, who that person is. I do not know who that person is, but I will happily hand over the responsibility to someone who I believe will be living in Columbia. And one thing I have become reacquainted with that we all can, that we a sort of a shared duty here, the drive from Kansas City to Columbia a couple of days a week, not so good. I'm not down with that. I really do. I always have, but I especially salute Missouri fans who do make that drive for sporting events, football, basketball, and other sporting events. That is a big ask of fans who live on one side of the state or the other. It makes Missouri a little unusual, in which the population of the state, the two population areas are two hours away by car. And I really do admire and salute Missouri fans that make the drive on a regular basis over to Columbia.
Well, Blair, you do a great job balancing everything. I do want to plug your podcast, Sports Beat KC, since I'm retired and I walk the dog a lot now. I just must listen, and you guys do that every day, and it's a great show, and we'll maybe get into that a little more later. So I want to talk to you about Tigers game against Central Michigan, maybe closer than the experts predicted. Mizzou was a 14-point favorite and struggled for a while, but you can't. How much do you take from an opener like that?
Yeah, well, that's the first thing to keep in mind is it was an opener. I think if this were a game in the middle of the season, the way it unfolded, I'd be a little more disappointed than maybe some people were. But I just hearing Eli Drinkwitz after the game got a real sense of relief from winning that game, and then listening to the players come to the podium and the joy in their voices after that game. You could just tell that was in many ways a satisfying result for the Tigers. It was a squirrely opponent, Central Michigan. You didn't know much about them. The programs had never played. Central Michigan was 3-3 last year. They were without their head coach because of an appendectomy. But Jim McElwain certainly knows, the SEC and what it takes to win in that environment. I thought they had Central Michigan very well prepared. So for Missouri to come out of there with a victory, a double-digit victory, don't make excuses for it. Don't feel terribly disappointed in it. I saw enough, I think, on both sides of the ball to feel somewhat encouraged. And to be honest with you, I'm a little more encouraged by the defense than I was the offense. I thought the defense gave up 475 yards in that game, but made big plays on defense, 9 sacks, a couple of interceptions, a lot of newcomers or new faces on the defensive side. I think there is room the room for improvement on the defensive side is there. And I think it'll happen as these players get used to a new scheme and a new coordinator and new coaches on that side of the ball.
Well, they'll get a chance to prove it this week against big game in week 2 against Kentucky Wildcats. You look at all the preseason predictions for the SEC. Missouri and Kentucky were 3-4, switched on all the standings for the SEC East. Kentucky had a huge win against Louisiana Monroe, although they're not a very good team. But the quarterback, Will Levis, Penn State transfer, threw for 367 yards and 4 TDs. This is going to be a really important game early in the season.
It is. I like that it's coming early in the season too. Mark, you're right. Louisiana Monroe may have been the worst Division I team in football last year, and they had a new coach, Terry Bowden, who we all recognize. So they're kind of starting over with that program. Still, it was an impressive win, as you mentioned. The quarterback, the Penn State transfer, throwing for 4 touchdowns. I know Kentucky and their fans were really satisfied and happy with that victory, more so than I think Missouri fans were with theirs. But I think Missouri's opponent was much more difficult than Kentucky's in the opener. So the other big factor in this game, of course, is the memory of Mizzou manhandling Kentucky in Columbia a year ago. The score was only 20-10, but Kentucky only had 145 yards of total offense in that game. Missouri was is kind of as dominant as you can be without blowing them out. And that game, of course, snapped the 5-game losing streak Missouri had to Kentucky. And, I think we can all agree, certainly the experts say that Georgia is the favorite in the SEC East with Florida at number 2. And then you're right, Kentucky and Missouri seem to be jostling for 3 and 4. And I think if you have any kind of designs on being a factor in the division race, if you're in the position that Missouri and Kentucky are in, this is an important game. A win here keeps you kind of thinking about being able to be a division champ, and a loss doesn't eliminate you, but I think it makes the road a little more difficult. And the way I look at Missouri is, Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, and South Carolina are in that level of schools that are a little bit below Georgia and Florida and above Vanderbilt in the East Division. And I think Missouri has the goods to be the best of that small little group and challenge for the East Division title every once in a while. So listen, with a quarterback in Connor Bazelak, who's back for a second year as a starter, and what I've saw on defense on Saturday, I think there's an opportunity here for Missouri to be a team this year that can think about no worse than third, and maybe who knows, maybe having meaningful games against Florida and Georgia later in the season.
One of the stars of the game for Missouri on Saturday was tailback Tyler Beatty. it looked like the Missouri ground game was sort of treading water, I guess to say, in the first half, and then he really exploded in the second half. Do you think the Tigers just wore down Central Michigan?
I do. I think the offensive line really, I think they were in better shape than Central Michigan's defensive front, and Tyler Beatty was able to take advantage, and Missouri was able to take advantage of that. The 69-yard run at the end. I mean, even Tyler Beatty said he was exhausted at the end of that run. So everybody was kind of tired in this game. But I think that's exactly what happened. We just saw the difference in class in the fourth quarter. That Missouri is they just have better players at more positions than Central Michigan did. And one of those is at running back. Even though I like Central Michigan's running back, who was over 130 yards himself. You've got you do have some experience up front for Mizzou, and yeah, there were some issues running the ball. There were some things on offense that I didn't like what I saw, especially through the first 2.5 quarters or so. But they were able to wear down a Central Michigan team that fought gamely, but in the end just wasn't in Missouri's class.
One area the Tigers are going to need to improve on, they were 1 of 11 on third down conversions, and they missed their only fourth down conversion. Did you see any trend there, why they were having problems?
Well, I'll tell you one thing that I saw, and a couple of these were calls on third down that I absolutely dislike. And it's not just Missouri. I dislike this as a general philosophy. When a team, gets a little, maybe they let's just say on first and second down they get 5 and 3 yards and make it 3rd and 2, and then they hurry up third down. They get back to the line quickly, trying to catch the defense off guard. And more often than not, in my unscientific opinion about this matter, it's the offense that gets a little discombobulated there and takes themselves out of the play. They're not set. Their timing is off, and there's failure there. And I think that happened on a couple of Missouri third downs where Eli Drinkwitz wants to just hurry things up a little bit, catch the defense off guard. In the first game against an opponent like this is a good time to do it. But I just thought, when you're not having any success on third down, when you line your offense up against Central Michigan's defense, you have better players than they do. So line up and let your better players have success against their players. And that didn't happen enough in the first half. I do believe we began to see that in the third and fourth quarters.
The one other player I wanted to mention was the new linebacker, Blaze Aldridge, the transfer from Rice. I think he had 3.5 sacks, and overall the defense had 9 sacks. What were your impressions?
Yeah, Blaze Aldridge, I'm going to write about him later in the week. He was terrific. He played the game that Missouri envisioned when they got him from Rice. 2 years ago at Rice, in the last full season that he played, Blaze Aldridge. I'll mention in a minute why I said Blaze Bryant, but Blaze Aldridge finished second nationally in tackles for loss with like 22 or something, 21.5 or 22. So he's a blitzing type of player and a run stopping linebacker. He did exactly what Missouri envisioned he would do when they signed him. 3.5 sacks among the 9 that Missouri had, and I don't know how many total tackles for loss, but a significant number. So look, when you have a player like that, it does leave you vulnerable sometimes in the middle of the field, and opponents will take advantage of that. But he was the right guy at the right time so often on Saturday that if I had to give an award for just a single player of the game, he would have gotten it. He did make an impact especially in the second half. And let me tell you why I mentioned Blaze Bryant. Nobody remembers who Blaze Bryant is. He was a running back for Iowa State back in the late 1980s. And the very first college football game I covered for the Kansas City Star was a Iowa State at Missouri game, 1989 at Faroe. Missouri went up 21-0. And then Blaze Bryant scored like 4 rushing touchdowns after that. And Missouri ended up losing 35-21. So whenever I hear the name Blaze, I'm sure that I will refer to Blaze Aldridge as Blaze Bryant during the season multiple times.
You don't need to bring up any more of those bad memories, Blair. So, we are talking to Blair Kerkhoff, Kansas City Star. If you'd like to ask him a question in the last part of our session here today, please go to the chat feature at the bottom of the screen. Blair, let's change the topic to the Kansas City Chiefs. There's much anticipated opener this week, and you spent a good deal of your time on the Chiefs as well. Is this offensive line ready? It's a tough first three opponents they have.
Yeah, it is a tough first three opponents, and the offensive line looked good in the preseason. Now they didn't get to go against Bosa for the 49ers, and they didn't stay on the field long in another game. So, but when this new offensive line with the three rookie starters played, it looked good. It did what it was asked to do, and that's going to be if you're a Chiefs fan, a primary focus on Sunday against the Browns. And they're going to play against the defensive line and with Myles Garrett and Jadeveon Clowney and others that will be unlike anything they saw in the preseason. So big test for not only the rookies, but Orlando Brown, who, has spent most of his career at right tackle, now becomes the Chiefs left tackle. I'm confident that we'll see that they've got the five right players starting for them on the offensive line. I like to point out that four backups for them, the guys that are on the second team, are Super Bowl starters. Laurent Duvernay-Tardif, Andrew Wiley, Nick Allegretti, and Mike Remmers are running with the twos, and all of them started a Super Bowl in each of the last 2 years. So the non-Super Bowl starters are starting for the Chiefs, and I think that actually bodes well and really defines how they looked to upgrade that position group in the offseason. You remember in the 2018 loss to the New England Patriots in the AFC title game, how the defense was just a disaster, highlighted and snapshotted by the D Ford offsides call that cost them an interception that might have sealed the game late. Well, what did the Chiefs do after that season? They just overhauled the defense, right? Gone was Eric Berry and Justin Houston and D Ford and Alan Bailey and a bunch of others. And they brought in Tyrann Mathieu, Frank Clark, among others, and they ended up going and winning the Super Bowl the next year. The Chiefs' offensive line was a disaster in last season's Super Bowl, and the Chiefs made wholesale changes, brought in the entire new group, and they're looking for it to pay the same dividends. And one thing that I do really like about this, and something that I saw in the preseason, was this offensive line's ability to move defensive linemen back. That wasn't happening with Mitchell Schwartz and Eric Fisher and others. I mean, they were great offensive linemen, Pro Bowl type players, but their job was to protect Patrick Mahomes almost exclusively and to keep the passing game, as fruitful as it could be. This offensive line, I think you'll see the Chiefs run more. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Darrell Williams, Jerick McKinnon. I think this offensive line's in a position to be a little bit more powerful up front, that opens the running game, that'll hopefully open up the passing game and make the offense just better altogether.
Who do you see stepping up as the second wide receiver behind Tyreek Hill?
Yeah, that's a good question. We spent a lot of the preseason talking about that. Ideally, it would be Mecole Hardman because he has speed and he has some other attributes. But to be honest with you, there is a trust factor there with Patrick Mahomes. If you had to seed the other wide receivers after Tyreek Hill in terms of who Patrick Mahomes trusts among Mecole Hardman and Demarcus Robinson and Byron Pringle, I don't think Mecole Hardman comes out on top of that group. And Byron Pringle to me is not only a short-handed guy. He's not the fastest of the wide receivers, but he just makes big play after big play. Demarcus Robinson is an interesting guy. He ended up, I think, third on the team in receptions last year after Kelsey and Hill. And it was because, Sammy Watkins was out most of a lot of the season, but I think Demarcus Robinson ended up number 3 in terms of targets and receptions. When Patrick Mahomes scrambles, when he checks down, when he's looking at his progressions, Demarcus Robinson is one that he finds often. Sidearm throws and, no-look throws. Often you'll see Demarcus on the receiving end of that. And typically because, Patrick Mahomes has checked down. So who steps up to become the number 2 guy? I think it's going to be really a combination of all of those guys, and might even throw in Darius Fountain in there, the first year player, not the first year player, but the new to the Chiefs player who they kept to after having an incredible preseason. So look, Kelsey and Hill are going to have their seasons, their big production seasons. And then second, the third leading receiver in terms of catches and targets, I just think it's going to be split among the rest, maybe 30 to 40 for Robinson, McCole Hardman, and Byron Pringle. And Hardman continues to be used on the jet sweeps and the end arounds where he can use his speed so effectively.
What role do you see Nick Bolton playing? Missouri Tiger last year was so great and was a second-round pick of the Chiefs.
He's a stud. He was a stud in college. Who forgets those last 2 snaps against LSU last year at the goal line? Well, he's going to play more snaps this week than he might otherwise have because of that's true the next couple of weeks because of the injury to Willie Gay, who, by the way, had a tremendous preseason. And I think he will end up being the player the Chiefs hoped he was when they drafted him in the second round a couple of years ago. Willie Gay, athletic, strong. I think he's a weapon at that position that the Chiefs haven't had in a few years, so maybe since Derek Johnson. But he's out with a turf toe for 3 weeks. And I think the Chiefs, it looks like the Chiefs are going to start Ben Neiman next to Anthony Hitchens in the 4-2-5, and that's probably the right call for a season opening game where you just need someone on the field who knows the defense as well as Ben Neiman does, and he's not as athletic as Nick Bolton. He's not the thumper that Nick Bolton is. And I think Nick Bolton's going to go from maybe playing, I would have guessed 20 to 25 snaps to maybe closer to 40 to 45 snaps in this game. And that'll be true of the next couple as well. I think you'll see Bolton play over, the other linebackers that are down on the depth chart as well. So, you got to live and learn and maybe live with the rookie's mistakes. But I do know that the Chiefs really, really like him, and he will be an impact player for the Chiefs. And I suspect at some point he'll be getting Ben Neiman snaps, even when Willie Gay is returned.
Do you know anything more on the status of Frank Clark? Do you see him getting suspended during the season? What is there anything new on that?
Yeah, the mystery just continues with Frank Clark, and one of the reasons it has is because there's been no access to him. The Chiefs control the media access of their players, so they decide who to bring to the podium and on what days. That was true at training camp in St. Joseph, and continues to be true now that the team is back in Kansas City. And Frank Clark hasn't been in front of the microphone since he's been since he's returned. Now, we don't know. We don't know what the status is. He's going to he does have a court date set in sometime in October, and the sense that I get is that the Chiefs. It's first of all, it's not a Chiefs issue. It's an NFL issue. It comes, it's being heard by the NFL's conduct policy and under the conduct policy, and I don't know what's going to happen. The NFL certainly is extremely sensitive and cares about the idea of gun violence, and with Frank Clark having an open weapon in the backseat of his car a couple of times, is not the type of offense that the NFL will just turn its head and and ignore. On the other hand, what Frank Clark did in California is against the law. If he had done it in a different state, it would not have been against the law. So there's certainly some gray area here. I guess we'll find out more. Andy Reid will talk to the media on Wednesday for the next time, and we'll find out more about Frank Clark's situation then.
Before we get to some questions, a couple other topics I want to hit on. First of all, the Kansas City Royals, they are 13 games under 500, but it is so fun to watch the marvel of Salvador Perez.
Yeah, I agree. It really is. We've talked. We spent a segment on today's podcast about Salvador Perez under the headline is why advanced metrics don't like him, and why the national media tends to ignore him. I don't know if the media thing is true, but he's not rated high as a defensive catcher in these advanced metrics. So Sam Mellinger, Lynn Worthy, and I spent some time talking about that this morning, and I just look, the guy's on his way to having maybe the best offensive season by a Royals player since George Brett. Better than any of the Royals players had in the 2014 and 2015 pennant seasons. And he's just been remarkable. That opposite field home run he hit against the White Sox on Sunday was unbelievable. 448 feet to the opposite field. I think I read where the Royals discovered that it was the 5th longest home run to the opposite field since StatCast, which measures the distance of home runs, has been in effect. So,
and that wasn't just for the Royals, right? That was any
all
player
of baseball.
Yeah.
All of baseball. So that's how locked in and how great he's been this season. The other interesting stat that I saw about him was he's the only player in Major League history now to have improved his home run totals and RBI totals every year of his career. So this is his 11th season, and you have to prorate last year because of because of COVID. But if you prorate his 2020 stats, he will have improved his home run and RBI totals every single season, and that's never happened in baseball history. So it's a marvel we're watching. I do think when his career is over, he'll be the second greatest Royal. If he has a couple of more seasons like this, he'll be the second player in Royals history to have spent most of his career in a Royals uniform to be in the Hall of Fame. And I just hope that the Royals can put a team around him over the next couple of years that can take advantage of the strength that they have at that position, because there are other teams in baseball, including, a lot of playoff teams that wish they had Salvador Perez. And now, if this young pitching comes along, continues to come along, Brady Singer threw great the other day, and so encouraged by Carlos Hernandez and Daniel Lynch. If Bobby Witt and Nick Prado and MJ Melendez are who we see them to be in Omaha, and they can be up here in the next year, and then I think the Royals are looking at a 500 or better team in 2022, and then a playoff contender in 2023.
The other topic I wanted to ask you about was conference realignment, particularly the Big 12. No matter what you think of the Big 12, it's important for Kansas City, I think, that the Big 12 survive. I guess the invitations are out for the 4 other schools to come. Is that going to happen?
It is going to happen. Those 4 schools are Houston, Central Florida, Brigham Young, and Cincinnati, and they may not end up stopping there. We'll see what happens. After Texas and Oklahoma leave. I've been going back and forth to Columbia over the last month or so, and so this topic we talk about it among media members and officials over at Missouri, and they are absolutely relieved not to be part of any of this conversation. Now they're impacted, of course, because they're going to be in a conference with 2 new members, and I suspect that the way that scheduling and alignment will be determined, that Missouri will end up playing Texas and Oklahoma more often than not. I think they'll be in a division or a scheduling pod with them. I don't know. Nobody knows for sure. It's all speculation at this point, including when Texas and Oklahoma are going to join the SEC. But But Mark, you're right, and you would know as much as anybody the importance to Kansas City starts with the Big 12 basketball tournament, and city officials were concerned when the news broke about Texas and Oklahoma leaving the league and what was going to happen to the Big 12. Would the conference get picked apart by other leagues? And of course that would threaten the Big 12 tournament, an event that brings about $15 million to Kansas City every year. But it looks like the conference is going to survive in an expanded way. It's been a Power Five conferences for a while now, and I think when the Big 12 survives with the 4 new members, you're going to have a Power 4.5. You'll have a conference that doesn't have its own TV network like the Big 12 hasn't had in its existence. It won't command the type of money that the SEC, the ACC, and the Big 10, and even the Pac-12 receive, but they'll get more than the Mountain West and Conference USA and the American. So I think it'll be slotted, as the 5th conference, and I think there'll be right now that seems to be about the best option for those schools.
You ready for some questions from our viewers?
Absolutely.
Again, if you have a question for Blair, please click on the chat feature at the bottom. First up, Desiree Reed-Francois saw her first game as the Mizzou AD. What do you think she saw that she liked, and what do you think she saw that she could improve?
That's a good question. So I went and covered her introduction at Mizzou a few weeks ago, and I thought she made a great first impression. And that's, what the value of that is, I don't know. I've been going to those types of press conferences for almost 40 years. And I've seen athletic directors and coaches make a lousy first impression and then went on to become, very successful, and vice versa. Her success will be gauged on the success of sports at Missouri and fundraising and coaching hires and fires and that sort of thing. But all she could do was make a good first impression. I thought she did just that. And then on Saturday, I go over to the game, and I'm in the press box a couple hours before the game, and she came into the press box and stopped to talk to everybody who was in there at the time, and to kind of reintroduce herself or to share a little story and to give us an update on on how moving is going. And I'd never seen that from an athletic director or a coach making the first game. She just made sure to stop by and say hello to everybody. And I was impressed by that as well. Now, maybe I'm easily impressed, and none of that matters if Missouri ends up going 2-12 or 2-10 in football this season, or Conzo Martin's team falls on its face and she's got to make a big decision. But at this point, I think she's done all she can do to be to be as good an athletic director as she can be, and I'm really pulling for her. I like that. I like that there's a woman in that position, and she's experienced. She is. She so impressed Missouri that they had budgeted a couple more weeks for the search, but when they identified her as the successor to Jim Sturck, that was done. The search was over. She was the one. So I hope she does well. And I heard she had a good visit last week. That was our little chat. We talked about her visit with the Tiger Club last week, and then just some common friends that we've had in sports over the years.
I'm sure we wowed her. I'm sure that's all she talked about. Next question. Eli Drinkwitz says that Mark Stoops has built Kentucky with in-state recruiting first, then finding a niche in the Midwest. That's a lot like Eli's blueprint at Mizzou, which he seems to be doing a great job of it. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that the ability to do better than Kentucky is available for Missouri. To me, the success Missouri football is going to have on the recruiting trail is to sell Midwestern prospects on playing in the best conference in college football, and also going into Texas in ways that Missouri used to go into Texas and have success there. They've never given up on Texas, but I don't think they went into it in as big a way as they should have after a period of time after leaving the Big 12 and joining the SEC. Seems to me they were kind of intent on recruiting Atlanta and Florida and the Southeast. But I do think that the key for Missouri is being able to convince some of the top prospects in the Midwest, the upper Midwest, that you can get to Missouri in a day's drive, and you can play in the best conference in college football, and then going into Texas and say, look, you come to Missouri and we'll bring you, you'll be able to come back down and play in your home state, every year. Whether it's to Texas or to Texas A&M, yes, that is the way to do it. And how can you argue with the returns so far at least when it comes to recruiting ratings? I'm not a big ratings guy, but you can't ignore them. And while they're not foolproof, they do give you some indication of the success. And I was on Seren Petro's show on 810 earlier, and he mentioned that someone had done a study that the college football national champion, while every once in a while you'll get a 2-star or a no-star player become an impact player in the game, those teams have the highest percentage of 4- and 5-star recruits of anybody in college football. So don't dismiss the idea that it's not important to get those guys. You got to get those guys. They don't always work out. Just look at the Texas Longhorns, but you need to get those guys. And I think Missouri has a better chance of getting guys like that from Illinois, from Ohio, from Michigan, from Missouri, and from Texas than they do maybe in the deep Southeast.
Paul Blackman could not join us today, but he texted me this morning, asked me to ask you about AEG's interference with Kansas City getting an anchor tenant for the T-Mobile Center.
Yeah, we've talked about that. So AEG is the company that now runs T-Mobile is AS. I don't have it in front of me, but it's 3 initials, Global, and so there's actually a new staff over there at the arena in downtown, and they operate buildings, arenas all over the world, and many in this country, many in the U.S. There is a resistance. This group they claim to have figures that support the idea that having a sports team anchored in your arena, an NBA or an NHL team, does not generate as much revenue as having shows, concerts, and other forms of entertainment. That people spend more money in those at those events outside the arena than the fans of the NBA or the NHL. I haven't seen that report. I've heard otherwise over the years that when you have the guaranteed 50 dates of an NBA or an NHL team, they come early, they eat in a restaurant and shop, and then walk across the street to go into a stadium or a ballpark. But I think that would be important to know how true that is, and maybe that would change our feelings about whether we want one. If financially the building is better off not having an NBA or an NHL team, I would think that would make it more difficult for whoever is in charge of bringing one here to have the energy to do that. Having said all that, I think there are benefits to having an NBA or an NHL team here that exceed how much money we're spending at Johnny's Tavern or whatever across the street, at the Dubliner across, in the Power and Light. I mean, it would fill maybe a little bit of a sports void in Kansas City from the end of Chiefs season through the beginning of baseball. I know college basketball is king here, but there's nothing like having a professional team in your market, and I hope eventually that happens. It all depends on whether the NBA or NHL wants to expand, or if a franchise is willing to relocate, and those are the two ways to get a team. And right now, I'm not sure Kansas City's at the top of anybody's expansion list, and the teams in both hockey and basketball that are, that could relocate. The Arizona Coyotes of the NHL want, they're getting kicked out of their arena. They want to stay in the Phoenix area, and the New Orleans Pelicans of the NBA, I imagine they're going to do everything they can to try to keep that team in New Orleans after having already lost a team there years ago. So I don't know. I'm hopeful that it'll happen someday. I don't see it in the next year or two.
I would personally love it. I tried to get tickets for the Blackhawks Blues exhibition game, which is going to be at the Cable Dahmer Arena. Granted, a much, much smaller venue, but they were sold out in about 5 minutes, I think. And the secondary market's pretty high. So question, is this Scott Frost's last season at Nebraska?
If they don't improve, I think anything less than a bowl season, it just might be. And who thought this could have been possible when Scott Frost was hired? Yeah, he was young and didn't have a lot of head coaching experience when Nebraska hired him, but Central Florida went 13-0 under him, and the favorite son. I covered a lot of Nebraska games when he was the quarterback, and there were reasons why Nebraska fans believe that they got the hire right when it happened, 3-4 years ago, and it just has not worked out. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's it's a matter of feeling great pressure. It always comes back to recruiting, not getting the right guys. And then I watched their opener against Illinois a couple of weeks ago, and they were making this mistakes and sort of the blunders that had marked his program in his first 3 years. That, all right, you want to give him a pass for a couple years worth of that. They weren't his players, but now they are his players, and they're still making the same mistakes. And I think his record is something like 13-21 as the Nebraska coach, and is about as unacceptable at that program as you can be. So yes, I think if it doesn't work out for him this year, there's not a bowl season for him this year, I'm not sure he's back. But to be honest with you, I don't know where Nebraska goes next. Once you've hired the favorite son who had success at another program, and he doesn't make it happen, I just don't know. And by the way, Kentucky has a wide receiver named Wendell Robinson, who was a Nebraska wide receiver last year, caught 2 touchdown passes for Kentucky last week, and probably their biggest threat at wide receiver.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, I just always think Frank Solich was fired after going 9-3.
9-3 with a 753 career winning percentage, and even Bo Pelini, who had some issues of some behavior on the sidelines, won 9 or 10 games every year he was at Nebraska, and they couldn't control. He couldn't control his emotions, so he left. But since then, it's just been a succession of bad coaching, but especially Frank Solich, who just retired, I guess. I think he did, or said this was his last. I can't remember if he's retired or this was his last season. But had great success at Nebraska. Who knows what, Tom Osborne stepped down. He wasn't 60 when he retired. And you just wonder what would have happened if he had played out his career a little bit longer, if he'd have kept Nebraska relevant for longer than it has been now in the last 20 years.
Next question. You mentioned media access for the Chiefs. What has access at Mizzou been like?
Well, that's a good question. And, today is their busy media day. And if it weren't for all the other duties, I'd have been over there today. I couldn't get over there. But Eli Drinkwitz speaks at Newton. In fact, he's talking right now, or just finished talking to media over at Missouri. And then tonight at 5:30, Steve Wilkes, the defensive coordinator, speaks. And then a couple of players come by and sit at a podium and talk. And you really don't get a heads up on who's coming. It's sort of who gets grabbed after practice. And there's about anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes worth of interviews with those players for, the television cameras that are set up in the back and the reporters that are sitting in the auditorium there. It's not ideal. And a lot of, some of this is the remnants of COVID, and it continues to be a COVID situation, a pandemic situation where there are limitations on the one-on-one type of interview or the small group interview. And but it's really been kind of frustrating and maddening to cover the Chiefs and the colleges here in the, in the this season with it's not a post-pandemic because we're still dealing with it, but we really lost the one-on-one time, the ability to chat. Now look, there's still an ability to call a player up, get him on the phone through the Missouri Sports Information folks. That's absolutely not true with the NFL and the Chiefs, but with colleges that can be arranged sometimes. But we're all still getting used to the idea of having less access to athletes and coaches, and then sort of the result of that is coverage that you probably will end up seeing fewer stories about kind of off the field stuff, personality profiles and long features about players that you'd need some time to sit down and talk to, that just isn't there anymore. And you'll see more of the stories that just come out of press conferences, soundbite stories. And I'm sorry that it is that way. And hopefully we won't be dealing with this issue much longer.
Blair, we're going to wrap it up here. I want to ask you one last thing. Most impressive win over the weekend. I didn't get to watch a lot of games, but I did watch Georgia against Clemson, and their defense was unbelievable. I did not see any of UCLA, LSU. What were your thoughts? Who was most impressive or surprising team over the weekend?
But Georgia's a good call. That defense was terrific. Of course, Clemson with a new quarterback, and but really had hard time with the Bulldogs. LSU, I felt bad for LSU having to, relocate their team for the week because of Hurricane Ida, much like the Saints are having to do. LSU spent the week in California and played that UCLA game there. And it was difficult for them. I was impressed with Virginia Tech handling North Carolina in the opener, and Sam Howell, the North Carolina quarterback, looked shaken, and that was a crazy interception he threw to seal that game. I think Kansas State was pretty impressive. K-State beating Stanford as handily as it did down in Arlington, Texas. That game was never close, and K-State was dominant in that game. We'll see how far the Wildcats can go in the Big 12. I'll tell you what, I thought Iowa handling Indiana was really good. Penn State over Wisconsin as well. So many good games that first week in college football. I'm an AP top 25 voter, and usually the first couple of polls are pretty easy. You just kind of go with your preseason selections and keep them all in the same place. But there's a lot of shakeup this week, especially when you get a 3-5 game with Clemson and Georgia playing. So a lot of great college football. It's so good to have it back, to have your weekends full of college football. I love Labor Day weekend because the colleges have it all to themselves, and we had every Thursday through Monday, at least a game every day. I really enjoyed that. But I'm so happy college football is back, and that Mizzou Kentucky game, that'll be worth the price of admission. I'm really looking forward to seeing that game Saturday.
All right, 6:30 on the SEC Network, and if you can join us at Chicken and Pickle for the watch party, we would love to see you. Blair, thank you as always for contributing your time. You guys at the Star, I know the newspaper business has been tough, but your sports staff is top notch. You guys do a great job, and keep it up. And I do want to encourage everybody to tune into your podcast, Sports Beat KC. It's available on, I think, all the podcast sources. I listen to it regularly. Can you listen to that live, or is it taped?
Well, I'll tell you what you can do on Tuesdays and now Thursdays. We on Facebook, on the Star's Facebook channel, we record the Royals on Tuesday and the Chiefs on Thursday, 10 a.m. for the Royals, 9:30 a.m. for the Chiefs. That becomes the podcast later in the day, but we really do encourage people to tune in live on Facebook, and you can ask questions or leave comments, and we address those with Sam, with Vahe, with all the writers at the Star that are on the show that day. Those shows become the podcast, and then the rest of the week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, just straight up podcasts. And this Friday will be the Missouri podcast. I'll be talking to John Clay, who's the columnist at the Herald Leader in Lexington, Kentucky. We'll be previewing the Missouri-Kentucky game on Friday.
All right. The hardest working man in Kansas City sports, Blair Kerkhoff. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, you guys. Always enjoy it.
All right. Next week, we will have Howard Richards, who is the color analyst on the Mizzou Football Radio Network. So join us for that. And then 2 weeks, we go to Gary Barnett. Of course, he was a national football commentator, and a Mizzou grad. So former Northwestern coach and Colorado coach. Everybody have a great week. Thank you again for joining us. Please spread the word and renew those memberships, and tell people to watch this on YouTube if they can't watch us live. Everybody have a great week. We will see you next week with Howard Richards.